Alrighty guys, Comics Kid 2099 here, and I recently went to see the movie Terminator Genisys. Saw it last night, but by the time you guys see this video, the movie will have been out for a few days. And I wanted to go ahead and get my thoughts out there on this movie now, because I figured if I waited a little bit, then people wouldn't care as much about this video review. So, I'm going to try to remain spoiler-free, but there's going to be some moments where it's going to be very hard for me to talk about the movie without spoiling a few things. So, unless I say otherwise, this review is spoiler-free. If I'm about to go into something that's a big spoiler, I'm going to say, hey, spoilers here, and then I'll probably put text on the screen that says, hey, spoilers are over. So, basically, if you've seen the trailer, then you know that this is kind of sort of a reboot slash sequel to the Terminator franchise. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like the Star Trek 2009 movie or X-Men Days of Future Past, in that it is jumping off of the movies that came before, and it's also creating its own timeline that it no longer has to follow the previous movies that came before. It's doing that. And if you've seen the trailer, I'm going to go ahead and tell you stuff that you would know if you have seen the trailer. But Kyle Reese is sent back in time to protect Sarah Connor. We already know this if you've seen Terminator 1. But then we find out that the timeline has been altered. Instead of Sarah Connor being a helpless girl who doesn't know what's going on, she has a Terminator who has raised her for the last 10 years and has basically turned her into someone who is ready for what's going on. And very quickly, they avert the plot of Terminator 1, and then this is where things get a little bit spoilery, but we find out that Skynet is an operating system that is launched in the year 2017. Originally, Judgment Day happened on 1997, but because of somehow the timeline getting altered, the launch date of Judgment Day, if you will, is pushed forward to 2017. So Kyle and Sarah, they go to 2017 to try and prevent the launching of what will become Skynet. And the movie gets its name from what Skynet is called before it's called Skynet. It's called Genisys, and it's spelled real funny like it is in the title of the movie. And so that's basically the plot of the movie without giving away a whole lot of spoilers. Actually, going into this movie, I did not know that they would be traveling to the year 2017. I thought the entire movie was going to be set in the year 1984, and it would just be a very different timeline than what we had in the original movie. I thought, okay, it's going to be in 1984, they're going to really quickly deal with the evil Arnold from that movie, and then the rest of the movie is going to be a liquid Terminator. Because if you've seen the trailer, you know that there's a liquid Terminator dressed up as a cop that's chasing them. And that only happens in the first 20 minutes of the movie, maybe a little bit more. After Kyle Reese goes back to the past, it's only maybe another 15 minutes after that that the liquid Terminator is a problem that they are having to deal with. The rest of the movie, it's something very different, and this is where I'm going to try to remain spoiler-free. This movie, the thing that I wanted to happen when I first went into it, you know it's going to be a reboot, and you know it needs to change things. It needs to alter things in order to create its own path and try and create a path that can allow for many more stories to be told in the world of the Terminator. That's what they're doing in the same way that the 2009 Star Trek movie, it creates a alternate universe so that they can do many more movies that aren't hampered by 11 films of continuity and Lord knows how many episodes of television continuity. Same with the X-Men movies. They don't want to be hampered by 10 X-Men movies. They want to be able to do their own thing. And so this movie is, you want it to mess with the timeline a little bit, but you don't want it to mess with the timeline too much. And I'm not entirely certain if this movie crosses that line or not. The timeline is sufficiently messed up by the end of the movie, and we could potentially have sequels that don't have to worry about contradicting stuff that happens in Salvation or Terminator 3 or anything like that. We've got a very different status quo at the end of this movie while still allowing for the possibility of future movies set in the world of Terminator. It basically kind of resets everything while still keeping a lot of the backstory from the original movies. So here's where I'm going to get really spoilery. If you haven't seen the movie, if you still want to see the movie, if you don't want to be spoiled, spoilers are in like 5 seconds, and then I will put up some text on the screen whenever I'm done talking spoilers. So the big thing that this movie does that really surprised me is that like all the other Terminator movies except for Salvation, this movie kind of has the same plot. Somebody goes back in time to protect Sarah and/or John Connor, and then someone else goes back in time to kill John and/or Sarah Connor. Although, in this case, instead of killing John and/or Sarah Connor, the plot is actually, we just need to protect Skynet before it launches. Their mission isn't exactly to kill John or Sarah or whoever the future of the Resistance is. Their mission is just to protect Skynet, and that happens to put them in opposition of Kyle, Sarah, and the good Terminator who's working with her. And so the big thing that this movie does that I thought was very interesting was that while Kyle Reese is being sent back to 1984, John Connor is attacked by a machine. And we're told this machine is not a slave of Skynet. Any of the Terminators, they are just slaves of Skynet. We're told that this is actually Skynet in physical form. And this machine takes over John Connor and basically turns him into a Terminator made out of nanites. That's the best way I can describe him. He's not exactly a liquid Terminator, although he kind of has that same power. He can shapeshift a little bit, but he's not liquid metal. He's like little tiny nanites that have formed the body of John Connor, but they also have this being, this entity, has the memories of John Connor. And Sarah Connor at one point says, John Connor is no longer humanity's last hope. He is Skynet's. And I thought that was a really good line, and I thought it was really interesting to take John Connor and turn him into a bad guy. If it had just been another evil Terminator sent back in time to fulfill a mission, either an assassination mission or protecting Skynet before it can launch, it would have felt old and boring. It would have been very dull. It would have felt like, hey, we've been here before. And really, when you watch all the Terminator movies, it's alarming just how much most of them have the same plot. Salvation kind of goes in its own way, and that's not what makes Salvation such an awful, awful movie. Salvation's just terrible because it's terrible, but Salvation doesn't really have the same plot as any of the others. This movie kind of goes back to having the same plot. There's time travel, there's assassination attempts, there's missions that you have to fulfill, and you're on a tight deadline. This is a movie that, while I'm already on this subject, you know the How It Should Have Ended channel on YouTube? I have a feeling that they are going to have a field day with this movie, because at one point, Sarah and Kyle Reese, they go to the year 2017 to stop Genisys, which is what will become Skynet. They go there, and it's like, okay, we have one day to stop Genisys. And I'm thinking, why? You have a time machine. Why couldn't you have gone like a week before the launch date of Genisys? And I know the reason is we need drama in this story. We need to have a little bit of the stakes are high, they don't have much time. And if they use their brains, if they actually program the time machine to take them a week and a half before the launch date of Genisys, and they actually had some time to do this, then they wouldn't, the stakes wouldn't be as high. The movie wouldn't feel as dramatic. It still makes these characters seem really stupid whenever they go one day before the launch date of Genisys, giving themselves very little time to actually do anything. I want to talk about some other stuff that's not spoilery in as much as what I just finished talking about. Number one, J.K. Simmons is in this movie. He's not in it much. Basically, he is a young cop who encounters Kyle Reese in 1984, and then flash forward to the year 2017, and now he's a desk cop, and he has all these theories about time-traveling robots and stuff like that, and basically everyone on the force thinks that he's crazy, and he doesn't do a whole lot beyond be that crazy guy who has Terminator theories. It would have been really interesting if this had been like a TV series. He would have been really interesting to be that guy who knows that the truth is out there and nobody else believes him, and he's always trying to find the truth about Terminators. But in a 2-hour movie, you don't really have a lot of time to give him anything to do. Speaking of actors being wasted, even more so than J.K. Simmons, that one kid from the Hunger Games, whose name I can't remember, he plays Danny Dyson, but it'd be okay if you didn't know that, because he's only in this movie for about 60 seconds. He does absolutely nothing. Basically, he and his father, who is not dead in this timeline, they have created Cyberdyne and turned it into this gigantic company that it is. It's basically like huge, bigger than Facebook, bigger than Twitter, bigger than anything, and basically they are running the company. And here's some more spoilers real quick, so mute the video for the next 10 seconds. Evil John Connor has helped them turn this company into what will eventually become Skynet. And again, Danny Dyson doesn't do anything in this movie. When I first heard that he was going to be in this movie, I was thinking, oh, okay, so Danny Dyson is probably going to be one of the Resistance fighters in the future. No, they don't do that. In fact, they don't do anything with Danny Dyson. If they do a sequel to this movie, I would really love to see Danny Dyson become a bad guy. I would really love for him to be vengeful, saying, you know what? All of my life, everything that I had was in this company, and spoilers for the end of the movie, but those people, Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese, destroyed everything that I have, and I've still got this little bit of Skynet that hasn't quite launched yet. I'm going to try and make it stronger. I'm going to deliberately cause the end of the world because those people ruined my world. That would be a very interesting motivation, I think, for a bad guy in this series, and it wouldn't have to involve the same plot that we had in the first 3 movies and kind of sort of the same plot that this movie has. It would be a different plot for a movie, but also it would come organically from something that happened in this movie, and it would feel like a Terminator movie without having to steal the same plot from over half of the movies that we've already had. I think that would be interesting. I don't know if they're going to go in that direction. I don't even know if Terminator Genisys is going to have a sequel. We don't really know how it's doing financially. We'll probably find out in like a week if it's doing really well or if it's just completely bombed, and that will probably determine if they are going to have a sequel or not. Something else that's not really spoilery. The lady who plays Sarah Connor, I believe her name is Emilia Clarke. I don't really buy her as Sarah Connor, and that may seem mean. I watched this movie and I was able to buy that she is a good actor by the end of this movie, but I am not buying that she is Sarah Connor. She is somewhere in between Linda Hamilton from Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. She's not the helpless girl that Linda Hamilton was in Terminator 1, but she's also not this super awesome warrior woman from Terminator 2 who can and does do anything and is the woman who's going to shape the future of mankind in the form of John Connor. She feels like she's more capable than Terminator 1 Sarah Connor, but she's not as capable and awesome and gruff as Linda Hamilton from Terminator 2. She doesn't feel like she's quite gotten there yet. And you might be saying, well, that's an interesting way to take the character. Make her be a transition from helpless Linda Hamilton to awesome Linda Hamilton. I keep saying Linda Hamilton, that's just because that's the actress who played Sarah Connor. And it would have been an interesting thing to see a transitionary Sarah Connor. The problem is, this version of Sarah Connor has been raised by a Terminator for about 10 years. By this point, she should be a lot closer to Terminator 2 Sarah Connor, or even further than that Sarah Connor. One who's just even more awesome and more adept and ready to do anything. But when I see her, there's this one scene in the movie where all 3 of them get arrested, and she's like 5 foot, and I'm thinking, she's just a little girl. And maybe that's kind of mean on my part, maybe that's unfair, but when I'm watching this movie, I don't get the feeling that she is Sarah Connor. I get the feeling that Linda Hamilton is in Terminator 2. I get the feeling that Lena Headey is Sarah Connor in the Sarah Connor Chronicles. Also, incidentally, one of Emilia Clarke's co-workers from Game of Thrones. But I just don't get the feeling that this girl is as much Sarah Connor. I don't feel like she embodies that character. And if we get a sequel, if we get a couple of sequels, maybe she will grow into that role. Maybe I went into this kind of biased, thinking like, I don't know if she's going to be able to do it. Maybe if I watch the movie again, it would work better for me, and I would be able to accept it a little easier. But just watching it the first time, I had a little bit of trouble accepting her as Sarah Connor. The only other thing that I really wanted to talk about in this review, and I know that this is very scatterbrained because I'm trying to stay spoiler-free, and it's not easy, but whenever I do need to spoil something, I'm going to, and here's something that's pretty spoilery. So cover your ears. You might just want to go ahead and turn off the video at this point because this is the last thing I want to talk about. This is the big spoiler thing. At the very beginning of the movie, Kyle Reese is sent back in time and we see Skynet attack John Connor. I've already talked about this. My problem is we are told that this is what causes an alternate reality because as soon as future John Connor is attacked, Kyle Reese starts having memories of a life that he did not live, a life where the war did not start until much later. And I don't understand how this happens. We're told that if someone is exposed to a nexus in time, then they can have possible memories of 2 possible lifetimes. The problem is, John Connor getting killed in the future should not have that effect on Kyle Reese at any point. Now, if John Connor was killed, say, in the year 1992, that would have a major impact on Kyle Reese, because his world would be very different. But John Connor being killed in the year 2029 should not have this effect on Kyle Reese. Also, I wanted to ask, what is it that causes this event to happen? Because when we see Kyle Reese go back in time, at first you're thinking, okay, these are the events of Terminator 1. And of course, if you've seen the trailer, you know that pretty quickly they get away from the events of Terminator 1. But what I want to ask is, what caused the timeline to diverge when it did? Because it's not Kyle Reese going back in time that diverges the timeline. Before Kyle Reese even leaves the future, the timeline has already diverged. Because John Connor getting attacked by Skynet, that does not happen in the first Terminator movie. Kyle Reese doesn't mention anything about John Connor getting attacked. And you might say, well, maybe he just didn't mention anything to Sarah, but it did happen. No, because the movies happened in a certain way in that first timeline. And John Connor getting attacked at the very beginning of this movie, that changes the timeline before Kyle Reese even goes back in time. I want to know, what is it that caused the timeline to be altered before Kyle Reese even goes back in time? We don't know. I don't even think the movie knows. For that matter, we are told that somebody sent a liquid Terminator to kill Sarah Connor when she was 10 years old. And then somebody else sent an Arnold Terminator to go save Sarah Connor when she was 10 years old. Who sent these Terminators? We don't know. I don't even think the movie knows. Again, this would be something that a sequel could possibly explore, but I don't think it's ever going to do that, even if we get a sequel. Even if this movie does as well as Jurassic World and makes $1 bazillion, I don't think that we're ever going to explore who sent those Terminators back in time to 1973. I wish we could have gotten an explanation for that, but I feel like this movie, it wants to do what the Star Trek 2009 movie does, and it wants to do what Days of Future Past does, and create its own timeline, but since all of the Terminator franchise is about altering the future, it doesn't quite think through how it's going to go about that objective. And it doesn't feel like they've really earned that objective. It feels like they say, okay, the timeline is altered, but they never explain how. And I really would have liked more of an explanation of, how is this timeline altered? How has the future changed in the way that it has? Something had to happen, and we're never told what it is. How did Doctor Who come to exist in this future and go and attack John Connor when he did? How did that happen in this timeline, but it didn't happen in any of the other timelines? I would have liked to have seen more of an explanation of that, but I don't know if they would have been able to have come up with an explanation that would have satisfied me. So that's all the spoiler stuff that I want to have. I did have one more non-spoiler thing to say. At the very end of the movie, well, it's sort of spoilery, but it's not as big as what I just talked about. So spoilers again, sorry about that, guys. At the very end of the movie, the Guardian Terminator, or as he's called in the movie, Pops, the old Arnold who raised Sarah Connor, he and evil John Connor are in the time machine that John Connor has helped Danny Dyson build in 2017. It doesn't yet work, but we are told earlier in the movie, if anything that's not organic is tried to send, if you try to send it through the time machine, it's going to create a huge explosion. And I didn't know that from any of the other Terminator movies. I thought they just said non-organic stuff can't go through. I didn't know that they meant, oh, if you try to put like a gun through the time machine, it's going to blow up like a fourth of San Francisco. Not that much, but a lot. And so Terminator and John Connor are in the machine, and Terminator says, you guys need to go and hide. This is the best way to destroy Skynet, since we have like a minute till it goes offline, till it goes online. And so Sarah Connor's whining and crying, saying, no, he's kind of like my dad. And he's like, no, this has to happen. And then they go, Kyle and Sarah go and they hide in a bomb shelter. And then there's this huge explosion that destroys everything. It destroys the entire building that Skynet is in. And then somehow the Arnold Terminator is melted down by this fire and is transformed into a liquid Terminator? I don't understand how this is possible. This version of Arnold is a T-800. He is a machine with moving parts. If you burn him, that does not mean that the metal, the liquid metal that comes from burning him, is going to transform into an upgraded version of a new Terminator. That doesn't make any sense at all. I really think they could have just killed off the Arnold Terminator at the end of this movie, and the plot would have made just as much sense. It would have been just as fine, because he doesn't do anything after this. This is like 2 minutes before the end of the movie when he comes in and says, "Hey, I'm a liquid Terminator now." And you know, it doesn't really do anything to change the plot. I thought it was really stupid and didn't make any sense at all that magically he's able to transform into a liquid Terminator at the end of the movie. And I do want to say that I keep thinking that I'm done saying what I have to say, but then I have more stuff to say. Arnold Schwarzenegger is the best part of this movie. I went into it not really sure what to expect. Not really sure what to expect about anything in this movie, but he has... I think every line of dialogue that I laughed at in this movie came from him. He is really fantastic at delivering these lines and making you laugh. And it's different than the previous movies. In the previous movies, he would say something, but it was more almost like the Terminator who says something like, you know, talk to the hand, like he doesn't understand why it's so funny. I get the feeling that this version of the Terminator, the one who, by the time we get to 2017, has lived like 40 extra years, I get the feeling that he almost does know why it's funny. When he says something, when he tries to smile, I almost get the feeling that he understands why what he's saying is funny. So when he tells someone to bite me, I almost get the feeling that inside, he's like, yeah, this is a funny thing to say. I'm going to say, bite me. And earlier in the movie, he would be like, I'm a robot. I don't understand that. What does that mean? All of the lines of dialogue that I laughed at in this movie, or almost all of them, come from Arnold. And so I do think he's the best part of the movie. If this movie had existed in some way where he wasn't in it, I don't think I would have liked it as much. But all in all, I thought Terminator Genisys was a pretty good movie. Better than Salvation. Maybe on par with Terminator 3, which isn't exactly glowing praise, but it's definitely not better than 1 or 2. And it's definitely, I would say it's about on par with 3. So if you're ever curious about what order these movies are in, I would say this is about as good as 3. It does some things right, it does some things not right. So I enjoyed the movie, though, and that's really what's important, because I went into this franchise, or I went into this movie really wanting it to be good, but not sure if it actually would be. At the very least, I just wanted it to be better than Terminator Salvation. And I want there to be good Terminator movies, because in concept, I like the Terminator. I like the franchise. I like the ideas behind it. But these movies have kind of gone off the rails, and I was really wanting this movie to be good so that we could get some more Terminator movies that maybe go back on the rails. And I think this is better than Salvation, so that's a good thing, at least. I don't know if it's good enough to start up a new franchise or not. We'll just have to see if that's what happens, but I liked it, and I do hope that we get a sequel to it. So those are my thoughts on Terminator Genisys. I talked forever, but it turns out I kind of had a lot of stuff to say. So I hope that you guys like this video. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a different kind of video. So I'll see you guys then. Have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.